Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth Motor City Bad Mouth. Alongside me tonight is Mel Farr Jr. And Mel, happy birthday.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it, Scott.
You're very welcome. Another year, do you feel you got any more wisdom?
No, just feel like I got older.
I joined the club. And alongside of us tonight is the X-Man, Xavier McKnight. How you doing, Xavier?
Doing well. Happy birthday to Mel, and we hope everybody's ready for all the hot entrees we're dishing out in our kitchen tonight. Yeah. Pretty sure the NCAA might not like this, but you know what? It is what it is.
That's it. And, hey, Mel, we worked Xavier pretty hard on the fantasy football show the other night with Ryan's School Route, so he's gotten a workout this week, but the X-Man always rises up to every challenge. So, well, 98% of this broadcast is going to be attributed to college football. We'll let Xavier McKnight take the lead on the San Antonio Spurs. Go ahead.
Yes, just by us being a sports media outlet and a platform, I just feel that, now is the time for us just to take a flight moment to appreciate greatness. For those who have not heard, the San Antonio Spurs have officially been eliminated from the 2020 NBA playoff contention. And this is the first time since the 1996-97 season that the Spurs will not make the playoffs. That means that for 22 consecutive seasons, the San Antonio Spurs made the Western Conference playoffs. And also during that time period, they won 5 NBA championships, with those titles being won in 1999, 2003, 2005, 2007, and 2014. They made the Western Conference Finals 10 times. And from the time period between the 1999-2000 all the way to the 2016-2017 season, they won at least 50 games in each of those regular seasons. And we just have a moment to appreciate greatness really quickly with the San Antonio Spurs and Greg Popovich and R.C. Buford and all of those great players, most notably Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manny Ginobili, as of recently, even though things didn't necessarily end on the best note there, Kawhi Leonard, and just that first-class organization and how they built that organization to be as successful as it was. They did it the right way. You never heard about the coaches or the players coming out and being involved in scandals. You never heard about them begging for other superstars to come and join what they had going there. If you wanted to be there and they wanted you there, you were there. So a major kudos, props, and shout out to the San Antonio Spurs for 22 years of consistent excellence. And who knows, maybe they'll be right back into this thing next year. But just a major shout out to that organization for doing it the right way.
What do you want to add to that, Mel?
Well, all good things must come to an end. I mean, everything comes to an end at a certain period of time, but it just goes to show you, Popovich is a great coach, and San Antonio's a great organization. They've done a very good job in drafting and identifying players and bringing them in to work in that system. And, you just have to appreciate what they've done there and tip your hat to them for the sustained success that they've had over the past couple of decades. They're kind of like the New England Patriots of the NBA. They got a great organization. They know exactly what they're doing. When they identify their players, when they're going out there scouting players, they know exactly the type of players that they want to get, and that will work in that system, and that will play hard for Greg Popovich. So, you just have to tip your hat off to that organization.
I like what the Spurs did, and I liken it to what the Detroit Red Wings did when they had 25 years in a row and added in a four Stanley Cups and an awful lot of playoff wins. So, yeah, it is a shame that all good things come to an end. So, kudos to San Antonio Spurs. Of course, I'll be biased toward the Detroit Red Wings. And, obviously they have to retool, rebuild a little bit, regroup. But I believe that the Spurs and the Red Wings will be headed back in the right direction as well. So, glad to lead that off. Well, now we'll take care of the business at hand, and that's college football's challenges. First of all, we'll begin with the MAC canceling their season. They're one of the first dominoes to drop. Mel, this broadcast should be titled I Told You So, because you've been telling us so for a long time. But what are your thoughts about the Mid-American Conference canceling the season first?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the conferences that have decided not to play, and it doesn't much. So, I mean, the kids is a portion of it. I think the liability issue, I don't think any of these universities want to deal with the liability issue. But at the same time, it's a money issue too. It's a financial thing. In order to do it, the amount of testing that would have to take place in each one of these universities, most of these schools couldn't afford that. And I don't know how much a test costs. I know Nick Saban said that they had the capabilities of testing their players every day, but not everybody has a budget like Alabama. I mean, Alabama's a big time program. But the schools in the lower conferences, they're not that are not in the Power Five, and even some of the Power Five schools, they just don't have the wherewithal, the budget to be able to test the kids the way that they need to test them. And the problem isn't so much on the field. The problem is when they leave. And if you're able to catch people before they get in the building through testing, then you can contact trace, and then you can isolate, quarantine, whatever it is that you need to do to prevent it from spreading throughout the entire locker room. But if you don't have the financial wherewithal to do the testing, then, it just kind of, it defeats the purpose. And you're kind of, you don't have a chance at really succeeding. So a lot of these things are happening. It doesn't surprise me, particularly from the liability issue. I don't think anybody wants to have to deal with, even though every year half a dozen players unfortunately die in the practice field, generally due to some sort of heat exhaustion or some type of heart condition that may not have been identified prior to them stepping on the campus. This here is a little bit different, I think, because, you have kids and, if their families are close by and what kind of effect it could have on a family. I think most of these universities, most of these conferences are afraid of the liability issue. I think if they could get around the liability issue, I think they'd figure out a way to play. They'd figure out a way to get these kids tested, and they'd figure out a way to play. But I don't think anybody wants to deal with this liability.
Great point. And Xavier, what do you want to add to that?
Well, we've been talking about it for weeks on this program, just that we would be very shocked that a college football were to be played in the fall anyway. And it's looking more and more likely as the days go by that we are not going to have college football this fall. That's not a definite yet, ladies and gentlemen, so please don't take that and run with it. But just the direction we're headed in with that, it just looks like that's where we're going with this. When I saw that the MAC as a conference canceled the season on Saturday, I said, okay, this could probably lead to a domino effect here, even though they're not one of the bigger conferences in the NCAA. But we saw other dominoes that fell into place much earlier this week that are huge plays and huge factors here that lead you to believe that college football will not be played this season. And to these conferences that are canceling, I would just simply like to say, listen, a kudos to you just for having the courage to do that, because it's not easy to take away the coach's livelihood and take away what these student athletes have been competing for and fighting for mostly their entire lives. They want to get to the next level and they want to be out there on the gridiron and play. But when you're dealing with a pandemic and a virus of this sort, and there's so much uncertainty surrounding it, and we see what the death toll looks like from this thing and how many people are contracting this virus, at least from what Department of Health data from all over the country, the states, and the world is telling us, it's best for you to go ahead and pull the plug on something like this, because the last thing you want to do is put someone at risk and they end up contracting the virus and they end up suffering a fatal outcome as a result of it. Or they possibly get exposed to someone, or they possibly expose it to someone else who ends up suffering a fatal outcome of it, or they're in the hospital for a very long period of time. So a kudos to the MAC conference just for having the courage to make this historic move on Saturday, and to the other conferences that we saw do this a little earlier on in the week.
Right. Well, and I'll get into those now. It began with the Ivy League, by the way, and it's trickled to the MAC, and now we'll go on to the next conference, being the Mountain West Conference, canceled this season as well. The one thing we can't lose sight of is not only whether it's a fatal outcome, we also have to lose sight of what this virus will do long-term to them as well, if it doesn't become immediate long-term effect. Let's talk about the Mountain West Conference as well, and I'll get to a couple of key points as to why a lot of these decisions are made a little bit later in the broadcast. But let's talk about the Mountain West and focus on them. Mel, obviously they're one of the bigger conferences out west. What are your thoughts about the Mountain West?
I mean, it's college football in general. I mean, the conferences make their own decisions because they don't have a commissioner in the NCAA that can make a decision for all the different conferences. And,
right.
And because there's so many different universities, you got 100 and some odd Division I, universities. and they are divided into conferences. They leave it up to the conferences to make the decision. But, college, again, my thing is, I wish there were, because this looks like this COVID thing is something that we're going to have to deal with for a while. There's no guarantee that anything's going to be better in the spring the way things are going right now.
Right.
I feel bad for the seniors. I feel bad. I mean, you think about it, they're talking about this pretty much all week, that if this had happened last year, Joe Burrow wouldn't have been the number one pick, would have been the number one overall pick. He probably would have been drafted, but he definitely would not have been the number one overall pick. And so for the guys who put in a lot of work, whether, 4 or 5 years at a particular school, and for it to come down to this, and they're not going to get an opportunity to complete the task at the university and be able to have the opportunity to audition for a job next year in the NFL where they can have life-changing wealth is unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. I feel bad for these kids, man, that have, worked very, very hard for, a number of years to put themselves in a position where they would have the opportunity to take it to the next level. And because of this pandemic and the way that it's been handled, they may not get that opportunity. So I feel bad for I feel bad for the kids. I think as far as the conferences are concerned, all these conferences are looking out for themselves. I mean, they had to do what they had to do because they do not want to deal with that liability. Nobody wants to have that on their resume that, something tragic happened because, they decided to play the games. But, playing the games, again, like I said, that's part of the issue, but being able to control it. And these kids, these universities just don't have the funds in order to, they're already getting by as it is, a lot of these schools. And to have a hiccup, most of them can't afford that. And I don't think anybody could see this happening. But, nobody saw this coming, and they just don't have the funds, and they can't raise the money that they need to raise in order to be able to overcome this so they could go ahead and have a season. Now, some schools could in some of these conferences, but not all of them. And so you have to do what's best for the whole conference, and this is the only decision that they can make.
Yeah, well, when we talk about conferences, and you're right, Mel, everyone has to deal with it individually. But when you start to talk Power 5 territory, now we're talking Power 5, the Big Ten canceling their season, they're targeting spring, and the Pac-12 following the Big Ten. The Rose Bowl buddies. Then there definitely is a lot more teeth to this thing when you have those two conferences involved. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised by the Big Ten. The Pac-10 the Pac-12 doesn't necessarily surprise me, but the Pac-12 waited for the Big Ten to make their announcement and immediately made their announcement that they were going to cancel it. Those are academic conferences. Those are schools that have they're very, very strong academic schools, have large endowments at a lot of those universities, whether it be UCLA, Cal, Berkeley, Stanford, Michigan, Penn State. Those are some great academic schools, Rutgers. So they can probably deal with. They could deal with this COVID thing. They could have put a team on the field, but they're more academic. The South, these schools here, they're built. Football is king down here in the South.
Oh yeah.
They're not, strong academic institutions. Alabama's not a strong academic institution. It's not a big research university. Clemson's not a big research university. Mississippi State, Mississippi, these schools down here in the South, they're not big research schools. I don't know what their endowments are. They're healthy, but their athletic department is what really makes these schools, puts these schools on the map. The proudness of what they do out there on the football field. So it doesn't surprise me that the Southern conferences are going to play. It doesn't surprise me at all. The Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC, because football is what they're known for. You look at the Big Ten and the Pac-12. Those are academic conferences. They're very strong academic schools in those conferences. So it's disappointing. But again, this is something that is totally, it's out of their control, and they have to be reactionary. And again, nobody wants to deal with that liability as well.
Xavier McKnight, what do you think about the Big Ten and the Pac-12 pulling out like they did?
Well, Mel hit the nail right on the head when he said that these are academically driven schools. So that's why I'm not necessarily surprised that they are the first of the Power 5 conferences to really pull the plug on the fall football season, because when you hear about students attending Michigan and Penn State and Ohio State and UCLA and USC and Cal, these are more academically driven schools. Yes, we do know that they have a great history of putting together great football programs, but that's not usually why students go to those universities. Stanford is not known necessarily for its football as it is for its production of doctors and lawyers and scientists that it puts out year in and year out. And I'll go back to something I said on Tuesday once again when it comes down to the South, the ACC and the SEC and these Southern-based conferences. It is lived by the 3 F's: faith, family, and football. And that is why I will continue to say that they are going to fight until the bitter end to try to have a fall college football season, even if they can get it started. Now, if they are able to finish it, as you said earlier this week as well, Scott, that remains to be seen. But you best believe that they're going to fight to the bitter end. But it's a big deal that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are the leading Power 5 conferences that are canceling the college football season, because you know that it is going to lead down to an even more bigger domino effect of other Power 5 conferences really considering cancellation too, because this is Ohio State and this is Michigan and this is UCLA, USC. These are programs with great, rich college football history. So it is a big deal, but you understand that schools that are more academically driven are going to depend more on what the data and the scientists and what the experts are telling us about this virus.
Good point. Now let's talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Initially, they wanted to play elsewhere. Desmond Howard wanted them to get kicked out of the conference. Commissioner Kevin Warren won't allow them to do it. Nebraska joined the conference in 2011. And just so you know, the Big Ten earned $781.5 million, and Nebraska's cut was $55.6 million for their payout. Now, with that said, I know the Big 12 is supposed to proceed with football in 9/26. There was talk that maybe Nebraska or the Big 12 reunion, but that was quelled earlier because as of 10/29, when I heard, Nebraska ended talk of playing outside the Big Ten. First of all, let's talk about Desmond Howard's comments for a moment. What were your thoughts about Desmond Howard's comments, Mel?
I didn't hear his comments, but I understand his comment. Nebraska wasn't the only team that wanted to play. I mean, I think they heard rumblings that the season was going to be canceled, and I know that Coach Frost had been talking about trying to put something together. But I know Michigan, they want to play. Ohio State, they want to play. They're trying to look at ways in which they could have a season as well. But they're not going to be able to do anything outside of the conference. That's just not going to happen. I mean, that's why you're a part of the conference. Now, as far as Nebraska is concerned, them moving to the Big Ten was probably not a good move for them. Because, obviously they haven't had very, very much success, in the Big Ten. And, it kind of being in the Big Ten, the footprint kind of hurts them as far as recruiting is concerned. So they're better off being in the Big 12, but, they're in the Big Ten now. What they decide to do in the future as far as conference affiliation, it's anybody's guess, but it's nice conversation for the coaches to have, but it's not their decision. Well, and I don't see that. I don't see that happening.
You make a couple good points here. Number one, Nebraska joined the Big Ten for money. Obviously, they knew they'd get a lot more money there than they would in the Big 12. And two, they were hoping to bolster their basketball program as well, because their basketball program was poor. So, they've definitely been able to upgrade their facilities with their association. Oh, I think they'll stay in the Big Ten for sure. But let's tell you what, they definitely ate a lot of humble pie. And, I listened to Desmond Howard, and he was right. You don't want to be here, just kick you out. You haven't done anything anyhow. Everybody expected a major powerhouse with Nebraska when they walked into the Big Ten. But when you talk about the level of competition in the Big Ten, let's not forget that Wisconsin's a very strong, solid program. They've had their number. And we don't have to tell you about Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. Michigan State's pretty good. Iowa's pretty credible. So I think the quality of competition in the Big Ten is a lot better than Nebraska thought it would be. And they haven't been that so-called powerhouse in the Big Ten than they were when they were with the Big 12. They have not performed up to their level. They haven't sniffed a national championship or any major success, not only in the bowl games, but, at a much elite level. Xavier, you want to chime in on Nebraska and the way they perhaps overplayed their hand, but that almighty dollar sign made them rethink otherwise?
Yes. So first, for those who haven't heard the comments that were said by Desmond Howard, I have the direct quote right here in front of me, and I'll go ahead and read that off. Quote, "You think that they're the only team that really wants to play? Of course not. All the teams and all the coaches want to play, but they're not whining and crying and then talking about an exit, talking about leaving the conference. I think that at this point, Greeny, referring to Mike Greenberg of ESPN, I would demand an apology from the chancellor and the president and Scott Frost, and not one behind closed doors, a public apology. Or, if I'm Kevin Warren right now, I'm working on a way to get their ass out of the Big Ten," end quote. I agree with him 100% on that. And Mel brought up a very big point here, and I stand on it as well. It was a huge mistake from a football standpoint for Nebraska to go to the Big Ten. They were not ready to face that level of competition yet. They should have stayed in the Big 12 where they were one of the perennial powerhouse schools of that conference. They probably would still be one of the perennial powerhouse schools of that conference to this day. But them moving to the Big Ten, that was not a very good move. They moved there right in the heart of Mark D'Antonio's Michigan State Spartans really starting to take off and make some noise in the conference. Ohio State is always one of the big players in the conference. Penn State's in that conference. Scott, you mentioned it earlier. Wisconsin is always a big player in that conference. And Iowa is one of those under the radar teams in the conference. They're not always at the top of it, but they can play spoiler for somebody who is set to be at the top of the conference. And now you have other teams that are rising up in that conference like Minnesota and the University of Illinois being led by Lovie Smith. So this wasn't a very smart thing for the University of Nebraska to come out and say, I stand with Desmond Howard on this, and I stand with what Mel said about Nebraska making a huge mistake just coming to the Big Ten. I feel the way about that I do about Texas A&M coming to the SEC. It wasn't the fit for you to make. That's just how I feel about it.
Well, I think that's a good point.
Well, you see, with Nebraska, they can't recruit the same way. They have to recruit differently than they recruited when they were in the Big 12. But they could go in Texas heavily and recruit kids to come to Nebraska because kids will go to Nebraska because their families could see them. I mean, they're going to play a lot of games in the state of Texas. They're going to play Oklahoma. There's games that people can, that their families can drive to. Well, the Big Ten, everything's out east. They're all long trips. So for a kid who lives in the state of Texas and he wants to, be able to play and his parents to see him, there's other schools he can choose. He's going to stay in the Big 12 and choose one of those schools where his parents can get to those games. So in order for Nebraska to be successful in the Big 10, they have to change how they recruit their players. They can't depend on Texas the way they depended on Texas. They're going to have to, recruit nationally, and they're up against some stiff competition. It's very, it's tough. I mean, I haven't been to Nebraska, but I mean, they're called the Cornhuskers, and I'm sure they're called the Cornhuskers for a reason.
Right.
If I'm recruiting, a kid, and I go I'm looking at UCLA and I'm looking at Nebraska. I'm probably gonna pick UCLA. Especially when you're going to recruit and trip in the wintertime. And in December, I don't think it's all that great in Nebraska in December or January, but I know it's real nice in December or January in Southern California.
Oh yeah. Well, bear in mind, Nebraska had their rivalry with Oklahoma. That was going really strong in the 70s and the 80s. Texas came around. All of a sudden, they were the third wheel. You know what I mean? And therefore, I don't know whether they felt like they were disrespected, underappreciated, whether that factored into it. But yeah, you're right. They definitely did recruit a lot in Texas. And they're over their head in the Big Ten. That's all there is to it. So, but for them, and like you, Xavier, okay, I'm totally in agreement with Desmond Howard. listened to it, and if I could give Desmond Howard a hug through the TV, I'd have given it to him because everything he said was there. Have Kevin Warren kick him out. And Kevin Warren even said, you're not going anywhere. We're under contract. We're going to hold your money. When you nail him right in the pocketbook, what do you think happens? And what would have happened anyhow had they have attempted to play in the Big 12 and all of a sudden, okay, they decide to cancel. Oh, that gets ugly, but that's for another day. So I think, to me, the only way to summarize the Nebraska situation is that's a very embarrassing situation for the Cornhuskers all the way around. And Desmond Howard and Kevin Warren look good in this whole thing. Yeah, you're right. The other coaches like Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day and the other ones want to play, but there's perception, there's reality. And we'll go back to the liability factor that Mel has been alluding to all along. So we'll put that topic of Nebraska to bed. And we'll take this football subject up to the Northeast, where the University of Connecticut and University of Massachusetts are not playing in 2020. Well, bear in mind they're both independents anyhow. I know they probably have financial challenges, but what are your thoughts about UConn and UMass not playing in 2020?
I mean, it didn't surprise me either. I mean, the independents, they're losing a lot of games. They're losing games because everybody was going to play a conference schedule, so they were losing games, and they made independents made it very difficult for them to schedule games. So again, it doesn't surprise me, but also, they aren't, those aren't big programs. Those are academic institutions as well. And, I'm sure they got a razor thin budget in the athletic department. They don't have the money that's necessary in order to do the testing, contact tracing and isolation and all that kind of stuff that they need to do in order to make sure that they're able to keep these kids safe. And then once again, nobody wants to deal with that short-term or long-term liability issue.
Well, UMass was once a member of the Mid-American Conference, and they got kicked out of that conference. So, but regardless, you're right. Independents are definitely not going to survive, especially in a COVID-19 pandemic. Xavier McKnight, you want to add to that?
Yes, just adding on to the point about them being independents, that's the main reason I wasn't surprised that these schools canceled their seasons. But as Mel said, they're not very big programs. And unless you're a current student of those programs or you're a graduate of those programs, do you even care that they canceled their college football season? If you're just a casual fan, do you even necessarily care? Is that raising your eyebrows right now? No. Not
how many UMass games have you watched?
None.
I think the only one I ever watched was when they played Michigan once, and that was sad. Right, exactly. So yeah, it's not like they're elite.
Nobody's saying, "Hey, I gotta tune in and watch this UMass game." Nobody's doing that.
Right, that's true. Well, hey, you're right though. They are academic institutions in the Northeast, the Boston and Hartford area, and with all due respect, academic institutions and the fact that they're independent and losing games doesn't help the matter, so they probably made their decision a little bit easier. So, but yet they're still sprinkled into this whole equation as well. So let's go on to the ACC now. They're not making an official decision regarding the 2020 season. So Mel, you alluded to the ACC. And they're not making one. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll find a way to play. There's very, very great institutions in the ACC. I mean, Clemson is probably like an outlier in the ACC. I mean, there's fabulous universities in the ACC. So it's going to be interesting. I think they're under a lot of pressure to try to put on a season, as the SEC is as well. And then you got the president chiming in and saying it would be a shame if we didn't have a football season here. But I mean, I think he's saying it for other reasons, for himself, because obviously it would make him look a lot better if we did have a college football season. But the ACC to me is the one that's interesting to see what's going to happen. I know they're going to wait a couple of weeks before they make a decision, but I would not be surprised if they did not. I would be surprised if they. Actually, I would be surprised if they did play, to be honest with you. I would be surprised if they did play. I would not be surprised if they opted out of the 2020 season.
Really? So why? Why do you say that?
Well, again, there's some good institutions in the ACC. There's some very, very fine schools in the ACC that are, known for their academics. And, you don't have there's you don't have a whole lot of Southern schools in there. You have some Southern schools with the Florida States and I guess Miami's in the ACC now, right?
Right.
But they haven't done anything much lately. Florida State hasn't done anything much lately. I know we got Georgia Tech, but that's again a fine institution. Clemson's down here in the South. But you got Syracuse, you got Duke, North Carolina. To me, that's going to be interesting to see, to be honest with you. So you got some real fine schools there. It's going to be interesting to see. I wouldn't be surprised if they opted out. I would not be.
So if I'm getting what you're saying, Mel, you've got a combination of not only Southern schools but academic schools, and that's why you are taking the position that you are.
You said what now?
There's a combination not only of Southern schools, but you're also talking about some great academic institutions as well. I mean, yeah, you're right. Duke is definitely one. North Carolina State, Georgia Tech are academically sound, right?
And the ACC, it's really, they're known for their basketball more so than their football. I mean, Clemson was put on the map. Florida State did some things, obviously did some great things. But they're a very good academic conference, and it's a basketball conference.
Well, and then you add Louisville to the mix too, so that's another one. Xavier, how do you want to chime in on this?
Well, I agree with Mel on this. Definitely some great fine institutions in the ACC. And I wouldn't be surprised if they opted out either, just with the mix of football and academic schools that you do have in there. Syracuse, great academic institution. But if the ACC does indeed choose to cancel their college football season for the fall of this year, it really does make me wonder, would that possibly make the SEC take a more serious approach at, okay, we really have to look at this thing here. Like, as much as we want to play, should we possibly cancel our 2020 fall football season? And I'm not saying that those conferences are on equal footing at all in college football whatsoever. But with the schools that you do have in the South, like Clemson, Miami, Florida State, North Carolina, it just makes me wonder, could that be the domino effect that will lead to the granddaddy of them all in college football, the SEC, deciding, okay, we got to pull the plug on this?
Well, that's true. That could be the pivotal. And since we're on the ACC, Clemson's Dabo Sweeney says fewer teams doesn't hurt the value of a title. The 4 best teams can go play. We've been one of those four for 5 years in a row. Well, if that isn't gloating, then I don't know what is. Okay, I think Dabo Sweeney better rethink what he's saying there. Yeah, you've had good success over the last 5 years, but what did you do prior to that? I think Sweeney's way off base. But go ahead, you guys can. Mel, chime in on that. You talked about Dabo Sweeney, but I think the guy is off his rocker.
Yeah, I mean, Clemson has been, obviously they've been, they got a great program there as far as football is concerned. He's done a heck of a job there. Really, they're an SEC school playing in the ACC. I mean, they're getting SEC type football players over there and playing SEC type football. And he's been very successful. You can't take anything away from him. What he's done has been successful. But again, I would not be surprised. I would not be shocked. I mean, they're really right now. They are head and shoulders above everybody else in the conference. But I would not be surprised if they did not play. As far as the championship, whether it be have to put an asterisk by it or anything like that. I mean, it's always going to come down between Clemson and somebody in the SEC. I mean, that's the way it's kind of been the past number of years. I know. So, I mean, he makes a valid point there in saying that it wouldn't. I don't think that the championship would be tainted. But again, they got that point. They got to see if their conference is going to even be participating in fall sports this year.
Yeah, but to say that fewer teams doesn't hurt the value of a title, I think I disagree with that thought at all. It does hurt the value.
Well, because really, it's the SEC, ACC, Big Ten, and everybody else.
Right.
I mean, the Big 12 is not going to get there. Pac-12 hasn't had anything. So it's really between those three conferences.
Right.
And then when you talk about the ACC, it's really Clemson.
Right.
It's the SEC, Clemson, Ohio State. Penn State, maybe. Wisconsin, maybe. Michigan hasn't shown us anything.
Right.
Those are the teams that you're talking about.
But then you lose some of those teams, and it does hurt the value, right? You already mentioned a few that you lose, so you're right. What are you left with, 2 or 3 conferences? I don't think the Big 12 has been overly that relevant anyways, have they? Oklahoma's looked good, but as far as just not hurting the value when you have 2 Power 5 teams out of the mix, again, I don't know. I still think that Dabo Swinney's a heck of a coach. I give him that. He's the only Clemson coach that's done anything since Dan Ford won the championship back in the 70s, I believe, right? 80s, early 80s. So other than that, the Clemson Tigers, to me, I give them their due now, but they haven't been always this relevant. Xavier, what do you think?
They haven't.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I was agreeing with you. They have not always been this relevant.
Right. To me, Clemson's a Johnny-come-lately, is the way I look at it. Xavier, you want to chime in on that? You're from that part of the country.
Yes. Yeah, so for those who may be a little out of the loop on the context of what we're talking about right now, I have the quote in front of me that Dabo Swinney also said on Wednesday when he was asked about the absence of the Big Ten or the Pac-12 and whether it damages the meaning of a title. And of course, we know he said no. But he said, and I quote, "The 4 best teams can go play. We've been one of those 4 for 5 years in a row. So, in my opinion, it doesn't change anything for us. We're just trying to be the best Clemson we can be. Whoever you play every week, you try to win that game. You try to keep moving forward. We don't have any control over that stuff. And I certainly don't judge them in any way. Everybody's got to make decisions that they feel is best. If they feel like that's what's best for them, then so be it." End quote. I'm not surprised to hear this come from him necessarily. It wasn't necessarily the best thing for him to say because we know that Ohio State year in and year out is usually one of the top 4, top 5 teams in college football. And if Ohio State, if they have a 2020 fall football season in some capacity and Ohio State is not featured in it, I'm not going to feel like I actually received the real college football experience for 2020. And if they do play in the college football playoff, I'm not going to feel like I'm actually watching the best 4 teams in the playoff when you eliminate teams like Ohio State, potentially maybe even a Penn State, maybe a Michigan if Jim Harbaugh can finally get over that Ohio State hump. But here's the way I look at it when it comes to college football, and Mel and Scott, I don't know if you agree with me. I believe that there's the SEC, and then I believe the second best conference that we actually have right now is the Big Ten. I know the ACC has some great schools in there. I know they have some schools with a great rich heritage in there. But the Big Ten has really taken another step up. And like I said earlier, when you take into consideration that other teams like Minnesota and Illinois are on the rise, you know that, okay, these are some of the better teams in college football. So, yeah, if Ohio State and some of those other big teams, they don't end up getting to play in this, I'm not going to feel like I received a real college football experience. But the reason I said that I'm not surprised that Dabo Swinney even said this in the first place is because he might be coaching in the ACC, but this is an SEC guy. Let me just bring up Dabo Swinney's history for everybody if you don't know about him. He attended the University of Alabama and played as a wide receiver from 1990 until 1992. He was on the coaching staff at Alabama from 1993 all the way up until 2000, when he finally moved to Clemson in 2003 as their wide receivers coach. He has that SEC mentality ingrained in his blood. So of course he's going to come out and be gung-ho about playing. And he's not going to have any regrets about who it is that they have to play against. As long as they can win a championship, in his eyes, there should be no asterisk by it whatsoever. And I'm not surprised to hear him say that.
Well, I guess you just went ahead. Mel, do you think that Dabo Swinney will be the successor over at Alabama when Nick Saban decides to step down?
Yeah, I can't, that's hard for me to say. Whether, if it were me, why would he leave? I mean, other than, strictly nostalgia or whatever.
Right.
I wouldn't leave what he's built over there at Clemson. He's built a fine thing over there at Clemson. Plus, it plays in a much easier conference. I mean, why would you do that? Just other than for strictly ego, to see if you can do it in the best conference in college football, and against teams week in and week out. And because it's somewhere where you went to school, but I wouldn't leave, and I can't say what he would do because I really haven't heard him talk about it a whole lot. But if it were me, I wouldn't do it. I think that Clemson, South Carolina, that's he's what he's done there. I mean, they'll put a statue. They'll put a statue out there in front of that stadium of him, where there's going to be there's quite a few statues out there in front of Bryant Denning Stadium. Nick's going to have a statue out there without question. Right. So I think he can leave a tremendous legacy there at Clemson.
No question about that. I will say this before we go on to our next thing. And the fact that Roy Williams left Kansas to go to North Carolina, so when Dean Smith told him to come home to Chapel Hill, Roy Williams had success over in North Carolina. So you just never know how deep the alma mater lines are, but I can see your point. So, but Roy Williams left Kansas, built a great program over there. Bill Self's done a great job with it at taking over. And then he went to North Carolina, and the rest is history. So just a little something, but I think you're right.
Well, Scott, before you move on, I'd like to add one more point to this, because yes, you're correct. You never know how this thing is going to play out. But if you want to look at one key example of why Dabo Swinney should probably not consider making a move like that if he is given the opportunity, even though that's his alma mater and he has a history over there, look at Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, and look at the lack of success that he has had against the better teams in the SEC. Now, I understand that there were issues going on at Florida State. There were scandalous issues going on. I understand they just had to get him out of there. But it's proven right now, as of this moment, that him going to Texas A&M and joining into the SEC probably was not the best move for him necessarily. That's just one thing that you can look at there as to why Dabo Swinney probably should not make a move like that if he is given the opportunity.
Good point. I'll leave it at that. No, I guess you'd probably leave it at that too, right? Ron?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point that you brought up, without question.
Okay.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, we're going to leave that one there. Xavier McKnight, you hammered that one home. All right, so let's talk about two big factors in all of this. You've got one, why they shouldn't play. We know COVID-19. We've already beaten that up pretty strong. But what about the guaranteed money lost by the smaller schools? I think that's the one thing that tends to get lost in a lot of this thing as well. Mel, you've already stated throughout that it's expensive for any university to test these kids. The other smaller schools depend on their guaranteed money to even finance the athletic department to begin with. So let's talk about those two big factors, Mel. What are your thoughts about? We know about COVID-19, right? We've already hammered it home. But how much of a factor does the guaranteed money lost by the smaller schools factor into why a lot of them have made their decisions?
I mean, there's probably going to be a lot of schools that are going to do the same thing that Stanford did. You're going to see a lot of reorganizations in the athletic department because of this loss of funding. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody was planning for it. And it's going to be unfortunate for some future student athletes that they're not going to get the opportunity to realize their dream to compete at the collegiate level in their desired sport. So the fallout from this is far from over. We're going to continue to see things like we saw that happened up there at Stanford.
Want to add to that, Xavier?
Yeah, the more unfortunate part of all of this, and it's very unfortunate, are the smaller schools that are losing out on the money and all of this. And you feel for them. You take them into account because you understand that some of these athletic programs, they are definitely powered by the football programs more so than anything. Football mainly powers most of the athletic programs around college universities in the country anyway. But especially some of these smaller schools, and they get those recruits and those scholarships and all of those sponsors and that money that may come in that may necessarily be helpful. You feel for them because you don't know if they're going to be able to recover from this. You don't know if they're able to just say, all right, we can't play in 2020. We'll regroup and we'll do everything possible to make sure that we can play in 2021 if everything is calmed down with this virus. So that's something huge that you have to take into account right there too. And it's a very unfortunate thing.
All right, so let's talk about how realistic is spring college football. Mel, you go ahead and lead off with this one.
Yeah, I don't know how realistic that is, especially when you're looking at guys. You take a program like Ohio State, you're looking at Justin Field. How can he improve his draft stock that they're playing in January, February, March, whatever the month they decide to play in. Weather in the Midwest is not all that nice that time of the year. I don't see how he can do anything but hurt his draft stock by playing in the winter or, in the first part of 2021. And then, of course, there's injury as well. And then you have the draft coming right around the corner. I don't see it because, again, you're trying to kick the can further on down the road, see what the lay of the land is going to look like in 2021. And right now, we don't know if it's going to be any better because I guarantee you, I can tell you when we first started talking about this and, whether it's late February, March, whatever it was we first started talking about this, I had no idea that we'd still be talking about it now.
That's
no
true.
clue. I thought we'd be over and done with it, and we're talking about what's getting ready to happen in the NFL and college football, and who won the NBA championship. I never thought that basketball would be on a 4-month hiatus. I never saw that coming. So to say that we're going to have one thing we're going to have to do, and maybe we'll be able to do between now and then, is we're probably going to have to learn how we're going to have to live with this virus. And maybe between now and then we'll have some therapies, some therapeutics or something like that might be able to help us recover faster if we do contract the virus. But, a vaccine is not going to be readily available, if available at all, come next year. So I don't think that these conferences are, I don't think it's, if you can't play now, I don't see how you can play in the spring.
And not only that, too, can't lose sight if these guys play in the spring, what's the recovery time for their bodies to get ready for a 16-game, 17-game NFL regular season? That has to come into play, let alone OTA.
You got to go through the whole thing again. I mean, these guys have peaked right now to prepare themselves to play in the fall. So now, they got to go through that whole process all over again. That's, for 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, man, that's a lot. It takes a lot of mental toughness to get yourself in a position, to get your body in a position to go out there and compete, then to be told that you're not going to be able to compete. And then there's going to be a lot of guys that are probably, if they do have it, that are probably going to opt out of it because, they have pretty certain draft stock. So, you want Justin Fields out there with, redshirt freshman offensive lineman. I mean, why would he do that to himself?
Yeah, that's true.
It wouldn't make any sense.
Well, you got your top 100 draft prospects will be not playing. You're right. They'll hire agents that will pay for their training. So, yeah, you're at that particular point, I think a lot of things are watered down. But, yeah, you make some really good points, Mel. Xavier, what do you want to add to that?
I agree with Mel on this. I believe that it's not very realistic to feel that we are going to have college football in the spring simply because you don't know what's going to be going on with the virus then. Also, the guys who are ready to go to the NFL, they're going to be focused on getting ready for the combine. I don't need to see Trevor Lawrence in the spring to know what he is. I don't need to see Justin Fields in the spring to know what he is. I don't have to see the best linebackers and the best D linemen in the country in the spring to know what they are. The guys who are ready to get ready for the NFL combine, they're going to be working out with NFL level trainers to get themselves ready for the combine and for team workouts and to put themselves in the best position to get drafted as high as possible.
Okay. Let's talk about Ohio State coach Ryan Day.
Let me just make this point. This is not really for the Trevor Lawrences or the Justin Fields. Think about it, again, like we talked about the Joe Burrow, and think about the kid at Oklahoma that played Oklahoma last year. Had he not had the opportunity to compete last year, he would have been a second-round draft pick for the Philadelphia Eagles this year.
Yeah, you're talking about Jalen Hurts, right?
Jalen Hurts, yeah.
Okay.
If he didn't have an opportunity to compete last year at Oklahoma, he would have been a second-round draft pick for Philadelphia this year. So it's for those guys that we don't know about right now.
Right.
Who were, really worked hard in the offseason, got their body in great shape, prepared, watched a lot of film, and we're really looking forward to, we don't know who the guys are, but there's somebody that's just going to all of a sudden come out of nowhere and have a great season. It's unfortunate for that, it's unfortunate for that individual, that he's not going to get an opportunity to, finish out his college career on a high note.
Well, that's a good point that you bring up with Joe Burrow, Mel, because he was fortunate that he played 19 and not 20. So anybody made out like a bandit. Not only does he play that year, he wins a national championship and a Heisman, think it's a pretty good work, some good work, and a payday to go with it. So I'm glad you brought that up. All right, let's go. Xavier, you alluded to Ohio State, so we'll go right up to Columbus, Ohio, where head coach Ryan Day wants the spring season to start in early January. In some respects, it does make some sense if it starts in early January. But I preface the word, Mel and Xavier, some. Didn't say it made total sense. So I'll let Xavier take the lead on this one, and then Mel, you can chime in. Okay? Go ahead, Xavier.
I'm not surprised to hear head coach Ryan Day come out and say that he would like to see the season start in January. I mean, at least that's close to some of the weather that they would be experiencing in the fall, in the late part of the fall, I should say, if it were to start like that. And he loves the game. He loves his program. He loves the coach. He wants the best for his players. He wants to get those unproven guys out there to see if they can improve their stock in any way whatsoever. I mean, we get it 100%. Now, is it necessarily going to happen? That's a question that remains to be seen. And Scott, as you said, some sense there, not total sense, because we're talking about January here now, which is 5 months away from where we are now. So how am I to believe that they're going to be ready to go out and play college football in January with the state of the virus and everything that we're hearing if they're not ready to even go do that now?
All right, Mel, what's your take?
I think he's saying that for selfish reasons. Obviously, the earlier he can have it, then the more likely he can talk some of those seniors into to participating in the fall season. I mean, in the spring season. But in order to kick it off in January, they're going to have to practice in December, and they're going to have camp in December. And I don't know, if anybody's been in the Midwest that time of year. That's the coldest time of the year in the Midwest: January, February, March. So you're going to be playing in those 3 months more than likely. You're playing 8 games maybe, so you're probably just January, February, maybe something like that, or 9 games, maybe you're January, February, March. It's cold up there. It's not exactly ideal weather, especially for a guy at the quarterback position and just about all the Big Ten schools, play outside.
Right.
Except for maybe maybe a couple schools that might play inside. So I mean that's tough sledding. I wouldn't want to do that if I were if I were one of the student athletes at one of those schools. But I think it's probably unrealistic that it'll happen at that particular time. But I can understand why he would want to do that, because obviously he wants to have an opportunity to give his guys an opportunity, his seniors to have an opportunity to play some of those guys who may be unknowns, to possibly move up in the draft or get themselves into the draft, whatever the case may be. So I mean, I understand the rationale behind it, but I think the likelihood of it happening in January is not going to happen, and whether it happens at all is up in the air, in my opinion.
Well, like I said, some sense, and with all due respect, folks, I was born and raised in Metro Detroit, so I know how cold it gets during that time of the year, let alone the fact that there are very few dome stadiums. Then you run into inclement weather. It's one thing to have to play 1 or 2 games in the snow and the ice, but they'll probably play the majority of them. I think liability for injuries is higher during that time of the year. And I know, Mel, that you've alluded to liability with injuries with COVID-19 and anything, but don't lose sight of bad weather. I'm not talking rain in most cases, but icy, frozen fields. But yeah, I agree. I don't. It's wishful thinking on his part. All right, Xavier McKnight. Well, we'll let you close off the broadcast before we get to the finale here about the Florida State players. Go ahead.
Yeah. So 2 days ago, Governor Ron DeSantis held a press conference at Florida State University with head coach Mike Norvell and 2 of the program's players, redshirt junior defensive end Josh Kando and junior wide receiver Keyshawn Helton. And during that press conference, those 2 players in particular said that they felt safe at the facility. They felt that it was the best place for them to be. They felt that it was the best place to try to protect them from the virus, considering the fact that they're college students and they're not necessarily going to be sitting still. And what better place for them to be out there than continuing to improve at their craft and get better at what they're doing, and also just feeling like they're in a safe facility where they say constant testing is usually going on. Well, something else came out today. And let's just say that somebody is not necessarily telling the truth here. A pair of Florida State wide receivers say that they were lied to about the school by its COVID-19 testing and protocol. And I said a pair of receivers. It was actually 3 Florida State receivers. Most notably, Tamarian Terry, the school's top receiver right now. And DJ Matthews, one of the other receivers at the program, he simply just tweeted out all the lies, shaking my head when speaking about that he may have tested positive for COVID-19 or not. So they feel that the program has not necessarily handled this situation the best way. They feel that they have been lied to about the program. And Scott, my question for you is, how does Mike Norvell look in all of this now, especially considering what happened in that press conference on Tuesday with Governor DeSantis and those other 2 players?
The only thing I'll say about the Florida State program is the whole thing has been dysfunctional for a while. They ran Willie Taggart out of town. Now you got Mike Norvell. Then they have problems with comments that Norvell said prior to this situation, if I recall correctly. So it hasn't been a smooth ride from Memphis to Florida State, has it, Xavier?
Not at all.
So I guess if you were looking for something out of me, Florida State football at this particular point is dysfunctional. They really are. And in fact, you know what? I'll even take it a step further. Florida State football, you know, at one point they were an independent with Miami. When they made the jump to the ACC, life hasn't been easy for them there, as Nebraska made it when they went to the Big Ten. But I would say they're just dysfunctional. I don't know what to believe out of Tallahassee anymore, to be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot of what happened since Bobby Bowden left. That program hasn't been the same. Mel, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of dysfunction there when they brought, obviously they ran Jimbo. Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, they ran Bobby Bowden out of there. Then they ran Jimbo out of there. And I never understood the Taggart hire. I said that from the beginning. I never understood that.
Right.
And then they paid him a lot of money to leave. And, so it's just been, I know it's probably very frustrating for a lot of the Florida State boosters there. And, it's just been a very difficult, tumultuous time for Florida State football fans for the last number of years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of par for the course. They've just been kind of dysfunctional.
Yeah, I think so too. There you go, Xavier. That's what I think of the whole situation. So, all right. Well, meanwhile, just listening to the Sports Exchange WSAN network, this broadcast can be picked up by Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. If I went too fast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Xavier, McKnight, lead off and let everybody know how they can get a hold of you.
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at XTMCKNIGHII, the 2 I's at the end are capitalized. You can follow me on Instagram at XMCKNIGH22. You can send me a friend request and a follow request on Facebook and LinkedIn just by typing in Xavier McKnight. And you can also catch me more here on the WSAN network, weekly or bi-weekly, here on the Sports Exchange, also on other programs that we have, and also on my own program here on this network, The Real and the Rare, where Scott and I will be back into play with that next week. Okay.
Mel Farr, let everybody know how they get a hold of you.
Hey, I can be reached on all the social media platforms at Mel Farr Jr. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Email address is melfarjr@gmail.com. And our website is melfar.org. You can take a look and see what it is that we're doing in Georgia and Michigan for our high school student athletes.
I know you take a lot of pride, Mel, in what you do with the youth. Why don't you elaborate on that? Since this is a college football show, go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of money out there. Well, there was a lot of money out there for kids to go to school and to continue to pursue their dreams. So what we do is we put together a one-day camp for kids who had not received a Division I letter of intent. It's a one-day camp, and they'll get the opportunity to showcase their talents in front of Division II, Division III, and NAIA schools, and they'll get letter of intents and scholarships right there on the spot.
I should point out that Mel Farr has a bio on the South Florida Tribune as well. Let me close out the broadcast by saying, okay, to follow us, you can go ahead and follow us on Twitter at Tribune South. That's the @ Tribune South. Our Facebook, you can follow us there at South Florida Tribune. Instagram, South Florida Tribune Gets It Done. I have a YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune. our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. I'll repeat that, www.southfloridatribune.com. You can go ahead and find our broadcast there. You can find content from our writers as well as our media distribution partners. You can email me at southfloridatribune@gmail.com, or on LinkedIn. My name is Scott Morgan Ross. Feel free to connect with me as well. So, you know what, guys? Outstanding broadcast. We covered a lot of ground, and I'll tell you what, I enjoy the chemistry that we continue to go ahead and build together, and I look forward to continuing that, you know. But, Xavier, any closing thoughts to everybody out there?
Yes, once again, as we close out every single show, ladies and gentlemen, please continue to take COVID-19 very seriously. This is not a drill, and this is not a game that we are going through right now. We don't know what is really going on with this virus. There's a lot of uncertainty going on. So with that being said, continue to wear your mask, wear your gloves, try to keep your hands away from your face, do not gather in large crowds, use great vigilance when you're doing this. And more importantly than anything, use your common sense. There are a lot of people saying a lot of different things right now. You have to use your common sense and what you feel and what you know is the best way for you to proceed during these very trying times that we're all going through right now.
I don't know if I could have said it any better, Mel. Could you?
Nope, I echo his sentiments.
I echo his sentiments too, so that makes it a threesome. So on behalf of Xavier McKnight and Mel Farr Jr., my name is Scott Morgan, Roth of Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us here on the Sports Exchange, and we will catch you next time.